Darkness clung to Kallan's skin. Like a disease, it devoured her, suffocating her and sucking out the light a lifetime of laughing beneath the sun had soaked in. It weakened her as she lay dying in the darkness. A distant beat drummed the silence. 1, 2, 1, 2. Kallan counted as she lay, as still as her breath would allow. The agony rang in her shattered nose, and she realized the drumming was her own pulse pounding her face. She tried to open her eyes, but the swelling had forced them shut, keeping her submerged in the darkness. Unable to shudder, she remained paralyzed by the pain, taking in every ache that spread from the tips of each finger to the core where her scythe recoiled. And in every breath she wished for death, when the darkness would take her. Fire poured through her insides. Kallan didn't wince. She didn't shudder. She didn't flinch. Her body was too broken. A boot kicked her over, forcing the stale, stagnant air to rush into her lungs as the cave floor scraped her back. With much effort she managed to open a single eye. A sliver of orange pulled back the black, and Jotunheim stood, cursing in what she could only imagine was a slew of guttural slurs that suggested he'd been hitting the black root brew hard. She saw his mouth move, but heard nothing. Her eye wandered to the stalactites clinging to the roof of the cave. Jotunheim landed another kick. Kallan gasped this time and studied the limestone tips above her as her body shook against the pain she could no longer feel. Color flooded through the stalactites, glistening in the firelight. Jotunheim's foot stomped her hand. She felt a snap, and he ground his heel into her smallest finger. A tear rolled from her eye. The orange light gleamed off the minerals embedded in the cave wall. Jotunheim's boot slammed into the side of her head. She felt nothing. Shadows danced against the stone, awakening her to the hidden treasures buried within the earth. It breathed and moved with the land, its heart concealing a scythe of its own, forever dormant, waiting, forgotten in the bowels of the world. All who knew of it had passed on to become part of it. All who lived had forgotten generations ago. This was the scythe Gudrun had spoken of, the scythe that mingles and flows, the scythe that is there, living and breathing. It moves. Until now, Kallan had failed to see. Jotunheim had stopped. Over her he stood, seething with drunken breath. Curious, Kallan lolled her head to the side where she could see. His face twisted as he screamed words she could not hear. Kallan relaxed and took in each breath. No longer fighting to breathe, she welcomed her death. His lips moved and he spat, but Kallan didn't hear. She watched Monseigneur pull on Durin's shoulder. They were shouting for a long while before they stopped. With flask in hand, Durin took a swig. Droplets of liquid, so dark a red they looked black, dripped into his beard where he left them. Behind him, Drui watched with the same sick grin, now mingled with the darker thoughts. His shredded tunic hung from his shoulder, revealing his chest he had seared with her flame. In the shadows, at a distance, Ori stood silent, his eyes as pensive as ever, fixed on hers, blanketed and empty, unreadable as always. If he heard what Monseigneur was saying, he didn't acknowledge it, engrossed instead with Kallan's mangled body dumped carelessly on the ground. She didn't move to communicate. She didn't try. She didn't care. She rolled her head back to the stalactites that greeted her, where the scythe glittered and danced in the Devagar's firelight. Cruel, cold hands clutched her wrists, forcing her gaze from the rivers of scythe. Desiring her final breath, she watched as Drui pulled a ring of keys from his leather belt. He located a single silver black elding key and fumbled with the chain that bound her to the floor. With indifference for her broken, bleeding body, he violently shoved his arms beneath her. Each jolt sent splinters screaming through her, and when he stood to lift her, he jostled her harshly. Pain surged through her, and the world felt dark once more. Silence. Kallan lay unmoving on the floor, her breathing rasped against her dry throat. She tried to remember time and failed. Pain reared its merciless claws, digging its way as it burrowed through her, but she didn't move. Tears flowed in their stead, and Kallan stayed in the darkness waiting to die. A hand brushed her face. She tried to flinch and failed. Long fingers, gentle fingers, cupped her head, and she relaxed, accepting the pain that followed. Cold and wet flowed over her dry, cracked lips. They parted with relief, and she gasped. Water sloshed mercifully into her mouth, quenching the fire burning there, and she gulped hungrily for the drink given to her. The water stopped, allowing her a chance to breathe. The moment she stopped to catch her breath, the thirst returned stronger than before. Whoever showed her mercy saw her need, and again allowed the water to enter her mouth. She drank, but not enough to have her fill. The water ceased, and a gentle hand lifted her hard head from the stone. She needed to know. Forcing her one good open eye, she saw the faint orange light of Ori's lantern. Relief flooded his eyes, and he smiled. "Where?" she said. It was the first sound she had uttered in days. The word ripped her dry throat, sending her body into a fit of convulsions. Ori tightened his grip, holding her body still. He waited until the coughing subsided before he answered. "Sleeping," Ori said. "They are all sleeping now." "Why?" "You really don't remember," Ori said. "Do you?" Knowing she couldn't answer, he didn't pry further. He released a deep sigh and once more submitted the water, letting the few droplets run from the cup he held to her lips. Kallan gasped, and he gave her a moment to catch her breath again. "Monsignor makes no plans to feed you into Alfheim. I know how long it's been since you last ate, since you drank." He shook his head. "You won't make it that long." She didn't answer, but studied the gentle eye the others lacked. Only after her vision wandered did he speak again, this time in a hurried tone, quieter than before. "Kallan." She returned her attention to him. "I cannot help you again," he said. "They credit your escape to your skills, but a second attempt won't wield such luck. They've abandoned your health to the generosity of Durin, whose brother you've killed, and are no longer making use of the drug. There is talk of letting Drui." Ori couldn't finish the thought. "If you make it alive to Alfheim," he said, "Monsignor plans to kill you there. If you die on the road to Alfheim," Ori shook his head again and gulped. "It's all the same to him." "Why?" "It's hell." The two words clawed their way through her throat, and she stifled another cough. Ori laid her back to the cave floor and took up his lantern before standing. "Because," he said, "sometimes the dragons are real." The last of the lantern's light faded, swaying with each step he took, and left her alone in the darkness. Lost and broken, Kallan laid alone on the empty floor of the cave, abandoned to the mercy of a vengeful hate turned berserk that brewed inside of Durin. She saw the hatred with every inebriated fit of anger he exercised. Ori had been right. There was no need for the drug any more. The pain supplied by Durin's rage was her new drug, and he was more than eager to administer it. Shadows from the lanterns came and went, but the darkness was constant. Each cave she woke in looked like the last, unique only by the assortment of stalactites and stalagmites that stench that ate her skin. Pang and shadow remained her only companions, pushing her deeper into obscurity. And when the voice had long abandoned her, when Kallan decided to succumb to their wishes, she closed her eyes and surrendered to death. It was there, in the darkest shadows of the deepest caverns, that his voice found her. "What have they done to you, princess?"